Hey guys, so this is my latest review of Unbelievable, the new Netflix true life crime drama, sort of like a thriller. So all episodes are up, so this is going to be my review of episode 5, and this is actually take 2, I have to tell you, so fingers crossed there's no further issues and this one will be up, and you're seeing this right now. So again, quite a lot to talk about in this episode. The case is bubbling along nicely, and again, some really good character stuff, particularly between Grace and Karen. And I think the two major sort of takeaways from this episode is, again, it's further developing them as individuals, but it's also starting to bring them together as a team. They're really starting to gel. They sort of iron out some of their differences in this episode, but it does a good job again of sort of contrasting their sort of different personalities and how they work, how they're both very committed to the job, but they just have different ways of going about it. And again, I think there's some really meaty stuff to do with the system and what have you, really critiquing the system and just having a look at some of the faults and some of the positives, I guess. And I think we probably see a bit more of a vulnerability from Grace as well, which is obviously good. But I'll start with the opening scene, which is when they go to, or Grace in particular goes to speak to Lily, who's the latest victim they found out. Although she's not quite a victim. I mean, she still is, but she's the one who actually got away. And she's the one who Karen and Grace wanted to speak to in the last episode, but they couldn't because she was still in hospital injured. And the mother was being very uncooperative, which you can sort of understand because of the way the detectives have been. And we found out Lily was very sort of religious, so that was another sort of barrier. And Karen, who is religious as well, sort of, found a way to sort of work with the mother and get her on side. But they obviously had to wait till Lily was discharged from the hospital. So Grace goes to see her at the start of this episode. And Lily is she's quite a character. She's very, very hard, or very critical of Grace and of the detectives in particular. Again, like the mother, she really is really distrusting of them because of the way the original detective handled the case. And she really gives it to Grace about how, there are leads to go on, but the detective didn't want to listen because apparently she brought up the fact that it could be a cop to them, but because it's one of their own, they didn't want to listen. And she said, things like a sketch artist, he didn't want to use a sketch artist just because he said there's no point because he's wearing a mask. And Lily mentions that she has an artist friend who she got to do like a deposit of it, like a poster type thing. So she gives that to Grace. And I'll come back to that in a moment, but so she's really laying into Grace here, and Grace, who we're obviously sympathetic to. I mean, I think we understand where Lily's coming from as well, and I think you can understand her based on her experiences so far, not wanting to trust the detectives and being very cynical, and obviously she's been through a lot. But we know obviously Grace and Karen are essentially good detectives and they want to help the victims, they want to catch this guy. And Grace puts us straight on the fact that they did reopen the case, so that's obviously something they didn't have to do, and that sort of shows then they want to catch this guy, they want to solve the case. And then at the same time, Lily sort of throws that back in Grace's face because she says, oh, okay, but any leads yet? And there's a sort of a pause, and I think Grace doesn't say anything, and then Lily's just like, oh, figured, and slams the door. So it's another sort of blow to Grace in a way. And at the same time, Karen speaks to the detective of the original case, and he's very sort of airy-fairy in a way. He's very much coming up with excuses why Lily might have made it up or imagined it. So Lily, as it turns out, is very spiritual, but very much in kind of a hippie Mother Earth type of way. And the detective says about her drinking this particular tea, which has, sort of drugs in it that can make you hallucinate. So really he's looking for excuses, but it maybe shows you that he's quite narrow-minded. And again, it's just this sort of quite lazy attitude. Because he might have invented a story in his head where maybe she got high and maybe hurt herself, sort of thing, whatever, because of course she had to jump out the window. So again, it's, kind of showing the barriers and the flaws in the system, and just sometimes the lack of understanding or the lack of willing to at least pursue this, because obviously you've got this testimony from Lily, and then it's just dropped really because he's suspicious, or he just thinks there's not enough evidence without really trying to follow it up. So there's as I said, there's some big scenes with Karen and Grace in this episode. So they come back to the office, both of them, and at this point there's a team of them, and they're you've got the intern guy who's trying to help, you obviously got the forensic specialist, you've got, his name's Taggart, Detective Taggart from the FBI. Again, I always think of Beverly Hills Cop. So they're sort of mulling it over, and they're looking into lists of suspects and looking at the sort of the small details they have so far on the case. And there's a gag about the poster, which is really funny, because when Karen finds out that Grace has a poster, she's like, gets on her and, why don't you tell me, sort of thing. Why didn't you tell me? This is important. And it just sets it up for the perfect joke, because then Grace unfolds the poster, puts it on the whiteboard, and lo and behold, it's literally just like a poster of a guy in a balaclava, so no new details. It's a brilliant scene. I just love that. That's sort of Grace in a way, so brash, just putting it out there. And it's sort of the light-hearted sort of moment that works, really. It's a character thing. It doesn't feel out of context with the show. And we see in this group in particular, there is quite a bit of banter. But yeah, there's a couple of important moments between Grace and Karen in this episode. One is then, because they've been having their differences, and from the start, Karen has felt like a barrier, then Grace was just doing her own thing. And I think in one of the previous episodes, she mentioned how she felt that Grace wasn't taking it seriously enough, and she was too sort of casual. So in this episode, Grace sits her aside and she says, look, it's just in my nature not to get excited by every little lead. I like to make sure we've got something concrete. I like to make sure we've definitely got a suspect. And so pretty much I don't get excited until there is something more concrete, till we've got the guy, or at least a very good lead. So she just explains and she does care, but she's just not the sort to get excited sort of willy-nilly, whereas Karen's a bit more anxious. So I think that certainly reassures Karen. But the other big sort of moment between them is then at one point Karen is really pushing the angle of it being an ex-cop or a current cop, and it's she's flagging up the theory or Grace, sorry, and she's flagging up the theory that this guy seems to know the patterns. He seems to be moving from state to state and only committing one crime. So again, with the knowledge, then there probably would be no communication between the precincts. So he would be pretty confident of not getting caught. So Grace is bringing that up with Taggart, and Taggart is basically presenting alternatives. So he's not dismissing the idea out of hand. He's presenting alternatives, and he's kind of saying, well, this is true, but I mean, look at shows like CSI. I mean, look at all the information they have in them, and how it's much easier now for the public to access this information. So it could just be members of the public, who have got this information and are using it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's someone on the force. And it's an interesting moment because at this point we're not certain really of Taggart's intentions, or if he is a guy who can be trusted. Not 100%. I mean, obviously the fact that he's agreed to work with them, and up to this point he has seemed to be a pretty decent guy, but I think this moment is meant to give you some sort of doubt that he maybe is making excuses for the cops. And I mean, he's FBI, but obviously similar type role. Maybe he doesn't want to think that one of his own essentially could be involved in this. So Grace sort of storms out, and it's a really punchy sort of scene because they're having like takeaway, and Grace has a great line about "I've lost my appetite," and sort of goes out and sits on her own. So Karen comes out after her and gives her a bit of a speech. Basically, she says, Taggart's on our side essentially, and he's just bringing up alternatives. He's just putting something out there, and it's interesting. I mean, when Karen sort of makes this point, you sort of go with it. You sort of say, well, yeah, she's right, and just because someone is opposed to a theory, it doesn't necessarily mean then that person is being cynical. Yeah, it doesn't mean that he's thinking concretely. Then it's not a cop. Just the fact that he's raising alternative theories, and I mean, I think a big theme of this episode is to do with the information that's now out there in the media and the advancement in forensics and what have you. But I think it really unpacks the good and the bad sides of those sorts of things. So this brings Grace around, and because Karen just points out bluntly, then just sitting on your, and I think she said fucking ass. She certainly uses the F word that, isn't going to achieve anything. And I just love Grace's face, the way it lights up, and she says, wow, like the Christian used the F word, sort of thing. And then Karen sort of swears again, and they both go back in. So there's a nice bit of banter, and it brings it back around. And I think this episode is partly showing Grace's flaws and her starting to unraveling, because up to now, she's been the one more in control, and it's been Karen, slightly unhinged, slightly, obviously very focused on the case. And so there's some good humour, some good light touches in these scenes. There's another funny moment where the intern, because they're going through all these possible searches, and so at one point he suggests just like a random search of underwear being stolen in the particular areas, and it's kind of played as a joke. They kind of laugh and kind of run him down, but then they actually they're good about it as well, because they kind of say, well, why not, cases have been solved by stranger things, so yeah, do the search basically. But it's obviously it's a stretch on his part, but they're quite right to say then you just never know, cases probably have been solved on stranger things. So there's some good banter, some good humour between the group, and you're really feeling them starting to gel, and I think it helps them work on the case and get things done. And there's a development where they get a link in Kansas, where they find out then a detective who is now, he was basically a rookie detective at the time, but he had a similar case to the rapes that they've been investigating, and because he's heard of them in the media, so he contacts them saying, well, a few years ago I had a similar case, then you should come and take a look at. And it's quite a funny little thing, because they do this whole thing where they all put their their finger on their noses, and it's a way to eliminate them from going. And I just like then Karen, as the outsider, is aloof to this. She's not sure what's going on. So because she doesn't put her finger on her nose in time, she has to go, because Grace says, I guess you're going to Kansas. But I think it's obviously a fun insider joke, but it's also a good way to get Karen involved and back on the case, doing more. So the Kansas scenes are quite interesting. She goes to, obviously, this detective, and he kind of just says, at the time I was a rookie, so it was naivety of me not to really chase this case up and do my best to prosecute the guy. But now, with more experience and hearing about the other cases, I realise there's something to it. And he's very good with Karen. He lets her have access to the case files, and is very friendly with her and very accommodating. So again, it sort of shows not all guys are jerks in this show, and he admitted his mistake, which was good, which not everyone does in this show, this drama. But he also gives Karen this book, which is a forensic book to do with rape cases, which again is sort of freaky, but kind of believable. You can believe that there would be such a book in reality. He says to Karen, they've heard about rapists actually using the book as a way to avoid arrest, to kind of work the system, sort of thing. So again, it's that good and bad. We live in this information age, and there's been big advancements in how they can solve crimes and forensics, but I think whenever you have that much information, that much technology, I think there's always going to be a good and a bad side, and certainly it questions if such a book existing and being made available to the public is really a good thing. I'd probably say it's not a good thing. But so Karen takes the book and starts to study it. And another really, really well played scene and a very striking scene is she goes to a local, it's either a diner or a cafe, and there's a creepy guy in there he's about middle age, I think, and he's checking Karen out. But then some young girls come in and he starts perving on them, and they obviously leave. And Karen picks up on this. And so what she does is when she's leaving, gets up to go, she sort of flashes her badge and her gun at him, so obviously letting him know she's a cop, and she's around and she's watching him. And he then, kind of is alert and sort of looks away kind of thing, so he's sort of freaked out at this. And I just like little touches like that and little things where it's reversing the power essentially. It's letting this guy know, then I'm watching you, I'm with the force, and yeah, to stay away from girls sort of thing. But it's just one of these scenes. I mean, there's a little bit of suspense because hey, he could be the guy potentially, or he could be some sort of rapist or whatever the case may be, or he could just be a perv. But it's also just a comment on, gender, the fact that girls are so sexualized and watched by guys, and it's just reversing the power dynamics in a way. Karen, as someone who works as a detective, sort of making him aware that she's watching him and to watch his step basically, which it sort of works. So again, really effective scene. So religion has been brought into this with Lily and with Karen. We find out that Karen is religious. And it's interesting because it did cross my mind that there might be something religious going on with the crimes, that each victim has a link to religion. Well, I'll get to Amber in a moment, but Lily is obviously religious. There's sort of a connection to Marie and religion just because her, ex-boyfriend, I guess current boyfriend now, Connor, he's religious as well. So she's not religious, but he is, sort of thing. But anyway, it's just a theory I had. We'll see if it plays out. But yeah, there's a nice little scene where we get Karen and Grace sort of on their days off, I guess. And Karen goes to church locally and Grace is out running with the dog. So we get the perspective like cutting back and forth. And I think what it's essentially saying is that Grace is more of an instinctive, sort of naturalistic sort of person, more of someone of nature, and sort of instinctive, not so much guided by God in a way, or that kind of thing. Not that Karen is. I mean, Karen is an extreme religious person, and she certainly does. I wouldn't say it necessarily affects her work, but it's certainly part of who she is. And so I think that's where the contrast is. And I think what sort of happens is Grace, she's running with her dogs out in the woods, and her part of the scene ends with her just coming across like a dead sort of squirrel, and she's kind of taken aback by it. And I think it's just saying that she is quite a big nature sort of person. But the meaty part of the scene is then Karen sees Amber at church, so finds out Amber's starting to go to church, and is sort of looking for that sort of comfort. Obviously her boyfriend I'm pretty sure she dumped her boyfriend, but certainly he's away, whatever the case is. So she's looking for some sort of comfort and companionship. And she also tells Karen then she kind of has had a couple of flings with guys from like the gun range, because she's now been going to gun ranges, and she's brought herself a gun to sort of protect herself, and she's kind of worried that Karen will judge her, but Karen makes it clear then, different people react and deal with these things differently, and this is just how you've chosen. So no judgment at all on her kind of sleeping around a bit, and she certainly understands why she would have a gun, just to protect herself, just to feel safer, I guess. And so, yeah, it's an interesting little scene. And we also get a bit more with Grace and her husband, and it is probably Grace's episode really, but again, she wants him to give up this file of this guy they suspect could be the rapist, and she really presses it now with him. And again, you're sympathetic because obviously it, in an ideal world, yeah, why not bend a little rule here and there if it's for the greater good, if it's to crack a case and get a potential pervert off the street sort of thing. But he stands firm, and I think you're totally on his side as a viewer because he doesn't make the rules. Yeah, he's just doing his job. He has to stand by the rules. There has to be a code of ethics with this sort of thing. And Grace is sort of harsh with him, saying, well, if he rapes again, it's on you. And he immediately says, no, it's not, and walks away. And of course it's not. And you're totally on inside with that, but I think it's interesting, and it's just showing a more desperate, vulnerable side to Grace. The sort of side we've maybe seen more from Karen and less from Grace. So it's good to have that alternative side that we're seeing with Grace in this episode. And I mean, at the end of the episode, she's kind of stepping things up to try and get the guy, because she sets up like a softball game through like a contact at the police, sets up a softball game with the guy which they suspect it is, and that's kind of, I think that's the very end of the episode, so that's kind of setting up the next episode, the fact that she's going to meet the guy, or potentially meet the guy, and sort of stake him out. So yeah, so it's showing again Grace is kind of bending a few rules to try and do this, and it maybe shows that she's a bit more of a renegade than Karen. I think Karen would be a more by the book sort of person. Grace, yeah, I think does have those alternative ways of doing things sometimes. So it's a really good episode for Grace, and again, I'm really enjoying the chemistry between the characters. And another interesting moment with Grace is the fact that late in the episode she's at a shooting range, and so we see her really training and really focused, and again I think that sort of connects her to Amber, who's obviously gone in a similar way. But yeah, really big episode for Grace. So I'll just there's a little bit more with Marie before we finish. And Marie, some interesting developments for her. So her two recent foster mothers, the Elizabeth Marvel one, and I forget the other one's name actually now. Yeah, I can't remember her name, and I can't remember who plays her. But anyway, the pair of them get together because, of course, in the last episode, they saw, when they were with Marie, when she was over at the foster parents, they saw the report of the crime on TV, the rape in the other area. So she goes to the Elizabeth Marvel character, the other foster mum that is, and kind of pushes it and says, what if Marie didn't make it up? I mean, it's so similar to the other case. And I think in the back of her mind she's got this logic that maybe she's had all along, even though she was a bit suspicious in the first episode. Then, yeah, why would Marie make this up, really? So she puts the idea out there to the other foster mum, and I think the interesting thing is that in some ways she's taking the same point of view as the detectives, the previous detectives, in the sense that she just has that attitude where even if there is some truth to it, even if she was telling the truth initially, then it's just easier for everyone just to sweep it under the carpet or just to move on, sort of thing. So I mean she puts these doubts anyway up because she kind of talks about Marie's history a bit, which is really, really harsh because obviously Marie's history isn't really her fault. She's had a string of bad luck, which you can't blame on her at all. But yeah, she's either cynical or she's just putting up this pretense because really she's saying it's not a good idea. It's better just to move on and leave these things behind. So really the wrong attitude to have. Of course it's not really their place anyway. I mean, it's up to Marie if she wants to pursue it, but there's obviously a little bit of pressure on there from the other foster mum. I think it might be Darlene, but I could be something similar. You'll have to remind me in the comments. But the other big thing with Marie in this episode is that it filters through to her boss at work, then what's been happening and the stuff in the media. So actually, to be fair to the boss, she doesn't fire her, she just moves her to the loading dock, so away from the shop floor, out of the spotlight and onto the loading dock. So in a way that's quite a reasonable move, but it's obviously Marie feels bad because it feels like a demotion and it's obviously a new area she's not used to. But anyway, she obviously goes along with it. But then later in the episode, when she's with this guy in the loading dock and he sort of flirts with her and kind of tries to hit on her. And she obviously is not interested, tries to escape as quickly as possible. And he does turn really jerky and pressures on her and kind of blocks her from leaving. And then he does this jerky thing, says, "Oh, I was only messing with you," sort of thing. And it's a really awful moment, a terrible thing to do, but even so, the fact that I think it's, again, a really unsettling scene just because this guy towers over Marie and potentially could be a total creep, could be, whatever you want to think, could be a potential rapist or could do some damage to her anyway. And again, it's this really impressive sort of tense scene where Marie is so small, not just the fact that she's quite small literally, but just the way the actress sells it and just the way she's like physically intimidated. And so I think these scenes are getting across just how at the moment every guy potentially is a threat to her. And I think it really gets across what it is like to be a woman sometimes in this sort of world, just how creepy it is, and just how more scary it can be, particularly for a young girl who has been through this, and the fact that she's still adjusting and trying to move on with her life. So this quite understandably freaks Marie out, and she sort of runs out, and then Connor's there because Connor's here to pick her up. And because Connor kind of is trying to find out what's happened and what's freaked her out, and Marie's just wants to get out of there, so she sort of shouts at Connor and says, can you just take me out? Can we just get out of here? And she says something quite harsh, which I can't remember what she says now, but she sort of throws it back in Connor's face. And yeah, it's just showing her state of mind, and the fact that she is starting to kind of have extreme reaction to things, and she is definitely off with Connor in this scene, but at the same time it's sort of understandable. But we know that Connor's a good guy, so you feel bad for him, and he then sort of storms off. And the other thing is the boss comes out and sort of gives Maria talking to and says, can't have you talking like that on company property and while you're working for us. And then Marie's again a sort of a instinctive reaction, says, well, that's fine, and then I won't work here anymore, I quit, and she cycles off. So yeah, she quit her job, so there you have it. And that's kind of the end of Marie's story for this episode. So really great again. So let me know your thoughts on episode 5 of Unbelievable, and I should be on course to finish it off, or finish the reviews off this week, so should have the last few episodes up in the coming days. But again, let me know your thoughts of episode 5, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.